Well, hello, everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your Critique of the Week for Friday, October 1st. It's October already. So glad you could join me. It's always a lot of fun doing these. As we always do. Actually, before we do anything, I want to let you know, just because last week I said that the next guest on the Rattlecast is going to be at the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Sunday night. But Marissa Davis is actually still in France. And so she was supposed to be back by then, but decided to stay longer, which is awesome. How can you blame her? It's France, right? But so she's still in France. We didn't want to make her do it at 3 a.m. So we moved it up to the morning slot. So the show Sunday is this exact time right now, wherever if you're watching this live, on Sunday, October 3rd, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. So I'll say that at the end of the show, too, but I just want to make sure in case people don't catch that you don't wait until the regular evening time and then show up, realize we already did it. And you missed. So there you go for that. So the critique of the week, the point always is to give that workshop experience to people who might not have the opportunity to have it, as like you do in an MFA program, or if you have a great group of friends who are writers that you can share and critique weekly or whatever with. That's what we do here. And so leave your comments in the chat windows, either on Facebook or YouTube. I'll try to pass a lot of those along, and the poets will be watching and reading those and hearing your feedback there too. It's hard to get that sort of honest opinion from a stranger, because, your friends know you and are trying to be nice and all that stuff. And we're just trying to be honest about what we like about poetry and what's working and what's not. So leave your comments and give some advice and let people know what's working and what's not. Now, we have two poets today, and we'll do the first one right now. And the first poem here, the first poet is Lois Villemaire. And the first poem is Confluence of Great Waves and Tiny Ripples. So let's jump right in. That day, I would reveal a smoldering secret, not sunny news, nothing to celebrate. Waves would roll, smashing sandcastles, creating space for the inhale of possibilities, like freshness of ocean breezes. Brushing off sand, I stood delighted to walk with you on the beach, a sisterly ritual we cherished, like our matching necklaces. Our shadows trailed behind, bare feet left soggy prints, filling in fast. Toes splashed in shallow waters as tiny cool ripples washed over them, angry waves heard breaking just beyond. Often we paused, attracted by seashells, porous shapes with micro crevices, squatting to examine their uniqueness, looking for perfection among the broken and cracked. Never remembering to bring a vessel, we balanced favorites in our hands like memories of our walks until we could collect no more. You listened, footsteps slowed, carrying words, a warm hand on my arm. You never alluded to lurking dangers of my decision to rock the boat, to leave the boat, to capsize the boat, except to say the waters will be rough. And that is your poem, the first poem, Confluence of Great Waves and Tiny Ripples. And I start off, Confluence of Great Waves and Tiny Ripples. It's an interesting title, makes me think a little bit. The word tiny I'm never a fan of in poetry. It's one of those, it's like, adjectives are the most empty part of speech. And tiny is one of those adjectives that's pretty empty too. Like ripples are always small anyway. And so, calling them tiny, I don't know. It's one of those like fluff kind of filler words usually. So I would probably find a better word there. Or maybe even not even use tiny. I mean, just confluence of great waves and ripples sounds better. Because the great waves, you think of a great wave, and then a ripple is, obviously small. So, but then you can still call that kind of great too in an interesting way. So I would cut the tiny. And I'd probably cut it down in the poem too. But that's my first thought. Now, let me make sure the comments are working. I forgot to do that. So Lisa Allison's here, and Laurel Benjamin, Mark Grinner, good to see y'all. Okay. And then over on YouTube, we got Clayton Clark. Good to see you from La Cañada, and then Annie B's first time, and D. Coleman. Okay, so we got some people. The comments are working. It's always on Twitter. I don't pay attention to Twitter at all. But if you're watching on Twitter, come to YouTube or something, really. That's just to maybe grab some people who wouldn't have seen it otherwise. But anyway, okay. So the comments are working stuff. Okay, that day I would reveal a smoldering secret, not sunny news, nothing to celebrate. So I would like the, a lot of times we talk on these critiques of the week about, not holding back and sort of telling the whole story. And here we don't know what is at the end making the waters rough. But I actually like the way that works in this poem. There's like sometimes if you set it up right, the mystery, if you focus enough on the details of the actual direct setting where the poem is actually taking place, then the ambiguity about what you're actually talking about or what's actually going on can sometimes work. And a famous example is the very short Hemingway story, Hills Like White Elephants, which is a similar kind of feel to this poem, actually. So if anyone wants to go back and read that, but it's these two people, having a conversation on a train, and you don't really know what they're talking about exactly, but you kind of realize or have your own suspicions, and then as the story moves on, and I guess I won't reveal it, but it's a good short story, and it doesn't reveal in the same way this doesn't reveal what the actual like problem that we're talking about is. I'm imagining, my interpretation is it's a divorce maybe. And talking to a friend over that, but I'm not really sure. But I don't think it really matters. I think that, because it's talking about the way that, this interaction between the two people, and that you don't need to know what it is that's sort of triggering what you're talking about to talk about it. So I think this works fine. And it might be distracting from the actual topic, maybe, if you made it all about what it was really about, if that makes any sense. So I like the structure of the poem, I should say too. Okay, so that day I would reveal a smoldering secret. Not sunny news, nothing to celebrate. Waves would roll. So we get we're in this would tense. That day I would reveal. Waves would roll, smashing. I think that's I'm not good with, I actually missed the year in school where you do like grammar and parts of speech and things. Is that the pluperfect tense? What tense is that? Where I would have done something or something would happen. It's referencing like it's a tense that's used, whatever it's called, and maybe some of the comments can tell me. Hi from Ireland, Dee Hines. Yeah, good to see you. Okay, so yeah, somebody can tell me in the comments what the tense is. But what it's saying is that this is happening before something else is about to happen. And so you get this sort of really complicated, actually, juxtaposition of time where we're like looking in the past even before this thing was about to happen. But then we switch off of that tense. And I'm not really sure if that makes sense. Like we switch back to the past, like we switch to the complete regular past tense, even though the secret's already told. Or not really a secret, but the thing that hey, it is a secret, yeah. So we tell the smoldering secret, but then we're in the past, even though, I don't know, there's a weird way that the tense isn't quite working right. So I wonder, because that day I would reveal a smoldering secret implies that like the stuff that we're talking about is before the secret. So then later the secret comes. Am I being clear? And so it's like we didn't, like you would expect later in the poem, like we didn't know yet that this thing is going to happen, that this would be about to happen. And that doesn't really make sense with the actual timeline of what's going on here. Anyway, that day I would reveal a smoldering secret, not sunny news, nothing to celebrate. Waves would roll, smashing sandcastles, creating space for the inhale of possibilities. Like freshness of ocean breezes. So freshness is kind of a cliche type thing, freshness of ocean breezes. Fresh and breeze are things that just are kind of married together already. Brushing off sand, I stood, delighted to walk with you on the beach, a sisterly ritual we cherished, like our matching necklaces. So we're getting the description here. Our shadows trailed behind, bare feet, soggy prints filling in fast, toes splashed in shallow waters, as cool, tiny ripples washed over them. Angry waves heard breaking just beyond. So we're getting the scene set up here. And you do want to set up the scene. So we're getting that. Well, Jason Brunner here says that the tense is called conditional, he thinks. That sounds right. Thanks, Jason. Yeah, and Deidre Hines says conditional too. Okay. The conditional tense. So what is the pluperfect? I think the pluperfect is something about possibilities, right? It's like if something might have happened in the future, but from the past perspective. Anyway. But see, so we've already shifted out of that, though. Like this is the day that something would have happened or was about to happen, and then we shift into just regular past tense, even though like we shift to where it's already happened. If that you're following. Our shadows trail behind. Yeah, so we're setting up the scene. Often we paused, attracted by seashells, porous shapes with micro crevices, squatting to examine their uniqueness, looking for perfection among the broken and cracked. So this is a nice sort of a metaphor here for the sort of the situation that's going on. That another English. What's the one where like Thomas Hardy would use it a lot, where the weather and the scene around you would be a metaphor for what's going on in your life. I can't remember what that is either. I'm terrible at this English stuff, but what is that word? It's on the tip of my tongue or the tip of my brain. That's another thing you're gonna have to tell me. But anyway, it's a nice metaphor here, because it's described in a very straightforward way. But then we can sort of apply it to the rest of the poem. Never remembering to bring a vessel, we balance. Never remembering to bring a vessel is a kind of strange way to say that. We balance favorites in our hands. I mean, like a vessel is sort of getting to the boat we're talking about later. But that's not really a thing that you would say naturally, I don't think. So, a vessel to carry these seashells that we're talking about. We balance our favorites in our hands like memories of our walks until we could collect no more. You listened, footsteps slowed, carrying words, a warm hand on my arm. You never alluded to lurking dangers of my decision. So I think lurking is maybe a little too forceful, maybe just the dangers, like a little distracting. To rock the boat, to leave the boat, to capsize the boat. I like this little run here. I think that's good. Except to say the waters will be rough. So that's the poem here. And I think what I'm trying to get at with this tense issue, I think there was some kind of impulse to use that tense. And I think it could be used in a way that makes the poem a little more interesting. The problem with this poem is it's kind of flat. It tells a story. There's a nice arc to it, but we don't really get sort of the feeling isn't really driven in there, right? There's no tension. Like there's a tension in the life and in the story that's going on, but we're not really feeling the tension as readers. And I think maybe a way to draw that out is to take advantage of this, which might have been an instinct that Lois had at first that was abandoned. But if you know that something's about to happen, that's tension. That's what drama is like what's going to happen, and that anticipation of the plot moving, right? And problems happening and then being resolved. That's the whole plot thing. And so you can have a tension there by just talking about the story that's going on, where the sister, I'm not sure if it's a sister, sisterly could just be friends that have a sisterly relationship. I'm not sure which way that goes, but the sister or friend doesn't know what the smoldering secret that's about to be revealed. And so you could talk about this walk on the beach and just focus on the time before the secret was revealed. So there's that tension about us wondering what the secret is and what's going to happen, and the fact that the sister doesn't know is sort of a tension too. So when one character knows something that the other doesn't, that's a real source of drama too. So we have all that possibility here, but then it's dropped out and never really utilized. And so we get to the spot here already where you listened. And so the whole thing doesn't have that sense of tension that we could have if we deployed it that way. I hope that makes sense. So that's what I would do with this poem, is sort of work on it and work on finding ways to have the tension so that we can feel it too. And I think you could do that, again, by describing the walk, but focusing on the before the sister even knew. And then, and maybe how will the sister react? There are all those things going on in the speaker's head, the I. The I knows that this is the day that some secret's going to be revealed, but the other person there doesn't, and that's the kind of thing to be using. So Clayton Clark says, I like the ending and the way the poem's told. But yes, I was going to say missing tension and could use a little more music. Yeah, so that's the issue here. It's not told in a way that's it has the drama. Let's see. And Deidre Hines says, I think it would be better in the present tense. So we anticipate. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting. And I'm glad you said it that way, Deidre. So you could start out like, I like this way to start out. That day I would reveal this. And then, we go through and tell the story of all the things that happen and all the ways that you're about to tell this and the thoughts going through the speaker's head and things like that. I think that's the way to bring out the drama. So let's see. Pathetic fallacy. So Deidre Hines, you are just, and Jenny Middleton too. Yeah, you guys are so helpful. Because I'm terrible with English was my worst subject. I know I shouldn't be telling you this during a critique of the week, but it was the only subject I struggled with in school. Because I can't remember stuff like this. Pathetic fallacy. Yeah. The technical term for weather used to symbolize the events described. Used by Hardy and by Shakespeare, says Jenny Middleton. Thanks, Jenny. So Mark Grenier says, micro crevices seem a little odd to me, too scientific for this context. Also, the elimination of the articles and the sounds, somewhat stilted. What purpose does it serve? Yeah, 2 great points from Mark Grenier there. Porous shapes, yeah, micro crevices does, the micro is sort of a different register than the rest of the poem. It's a very technical, scientific, like you said, terminology. So you're in that lexicon instead of the sort of words that the rest of the poem is using. And so here, like tiny crevices would actually work, even though I, pull it out of here. Let's see. And then the other, and then I did notice a few times where the was dropped. And, like we've played it before, but that Rina Espaillat, that great sonnet by her that talks about how important the articles are, because they make they make it feel natural, and natural is compelling in its honesty. And so that's why articles are important. And actually the interview I'm editing with James Pennebaker for the winter issue, we talk about this some, because, you can, he, with his Luke linguistic, analysis of words, I can't remember what it's called, his computer algorithm that he writes that analyzes text, can use it to determine honesty, and it's based on the number and rate of articles that you use is one of the things that's very important in that program. And so we pick up, I think we pick that up in the same way we pick up like body language subconsciously, like the natural use of language. We can feel when it's being natural, and we can feel when it's being manipulated. And that's why it's important to use the articles and make it feel like the natural music of speech. There's also a thing too that goes on where the important words, the verbs and nouns, are stressed, and then the articles and things are unstressed. So that's how you get the beat going too. So it's really important to use natural articles in most cases. Occasionally there's a reason not to, but in most cases it's better to use natural speech than not. So wherever these, I did notice them too. I'm not going to go through and look, but that's just don't cut those out. It doesn't make it sound more poetic. It makes it sound less natural and less musical. Let's move on to the next poem, though. We have about 10 minutes left for Lois, so we want to make sure we get to both. And this next one is, wait for the camera to readjust. My apology to the patient I walked out on in 1965. Again, this is Lois Villemaire. Pink and white striped pinafore dress, a badge of membership as a volunteer. My duties were simple: fill the water pitcher and shaved ice cups, deliver meal trays, return empty trays to rolling carts. From the doorway to your room, I saw your face had suffered horrific burns. No natural skin was visible, overcome by swollen, distorted features like a scary Halloween mask. You looked into my eyes as if to say, I'm sorry if I frighten you. I forced my trembling mouth into a smile, dropped off your meal tray and darted away like a hummingbird. I'm sorry no one had thought to prepare me for the sight of your unfortunate injuries. Maybe I could have better composed myself. Perhaps I could have said, I'm sorry for your burns. Instead, I left the floor, left the hospital, drove home overwhelmed by your countenance, saddened, feeling like a failure. It's another a subject worthy of a poem. which is sort of a lot of times it's the first bar you have to pass. Is this something that's worth talking about? And I think both these poems are, which is a good thing. My apology to the patients I walked down on in 1965. I think that's a great title because it sets us up. It lets us know where we are. We don't have to wonder. And that just lets us feel free to connect with the poem. So, it's usually really good to get this, set the stage and the title. And this poem does that. Pink and white striped pinafore dress. So we're getting imagery, further building the scene. A badge of membership as a volunteer. I think this is a little bit of an awkward way to say this. A badge of membership as a volunteer. Is a volunteer badge would be a simpler, more direct way to say that. A volunteer badge. My duties were simple: fill the water pitcher and shave the ice cups, deliver meal trays, return empty trays to rolling carts. So, fill the water pitcher. I'd probably not use the and there. Just making a list. Fill the water pitcher and shaved ice cups, deliver meal trays, return empty trays. There's something about the way deliver meal trays, return empty trays. There's a way that the trays lands on the same beat that feels a little, it makes the repetition of the trays stand out a lot. So I'd maybe change the wording of that a little bit. Deliver meal trays. You could cut the word trays, like repetition of words makes them stand out, and it's very noticeable. And so you want to make sure if you're repeating something, it's a really important thing that you're repeating, really. And the fact that there's some meal trays and then they're empty doesn't really seem important. So I would probably, just say the empties, or maybe I don't know, something like that. But there's a way that, a way to say that doesn't repeat the trays. So find a way to say that doesn't. From the doorway to your room, I saw your face had suffered horrific burns. No natural skin was visible. I think here we can cut the was too. There's a rhythm that's sort of unfolding from these poems and from these lines. And I think like having them, like I feel like it wants to be a little more listy. And so I think let that, when that starts to happen, let it happen. Overcome by swollen, distorted features. I think maybe for swollen, distorted, I would pick one because it's close enough. I don't know if you need both. Like a scary Halloween mask. And here's an opportunity. You looked into my eyes. So look at this. This is an opportunity to make some interesting use of syntax and to make it much more vivid. So feel how much better it would be if we said something instead of like a scary Halloween mask, which is just a metaphor that we're using to describe the situation, right? But then, what if the eyes were just peering out of a Halloween mask? Or if you find an even better description than that. But imagine like the way that you can see the actual human being in their eyes through a mask. Underneath the fake mask, And there's something like human about that underneath that's really interesting. And I think there could be a great description there if you combine these two sentences. And so think about opportunities like that as you write too, to sort of condense and make the descriptions more vivid in the way they're like layered together. As if to say, I'm sorry if I frighten you. I forced my trembling mouth into a smile. Dropped off your meal tray. Again, we get the meal tray. So we get meal tray and tray 3 times and darted away like a hummingbird. I like the darted away like a hummingbird. It's very, it's a great description of the movement of that, because a hummingbird dipping its, beak in the flower and then darting off. It's a really good description of that actual action. I'm sorry no one had thought to prepare me for this sight. I don't know, the no one had thought sort of is deflecting blame a little bit. I wonder if you just, I'm sorry I wasn't prepared. And then you don't have to, I wasn't. If you cut that out, I'm sorry I wasn't prepared for this sight of you, then you don't have that like, it was their fault for not telling me. It was just sort of a defensive barrier a little bit. Maybe I could have better composed myself. Perhaps I could have said, I'm sorry for your burns. See, perhaps I said this is a pretty weak line to him, So I don't know if this is necessary either. I'd probably cut those. Instead, I left the floor, left the hospital. I like to see this is another one of those listing. This poem is like drawing out these lists, and they work. Instead, I left the floor, left the hospital, drove home overwhelmed by your countenance, saddened, feeling like a failure. And here, another opportunity. Whenever you see a like we had up here, like a scary, when you use the word like, you're just using a simile and sort of doing a one-to-one thing. Like it's sort of a one move instead of like a combination. You can think of it like a boxer or something. It's like throwing a right hook or something when you have when you use the word like. And things work so much better in combination. And and this is another opportunity here. So we say like a failure. But we could just say, I drove home a failure, and then use metaphor in a more interesting way, let's say. So that's something to play with too. But I love this. I love the hummingbird, and I love the way we drove home and left the floor. The panic. I think we talk about the missing tension in the last poem, and I think there's the tension here. This is kind of, you can feel especially, the hummingbird's heart beating fast too, and the wings beating fast. Like you can feel the tension in that. And so I think this works at the end. So I like this at the end. Let's see what people are saying about it. So Kimberly McNeil says, pity is complicated. That's a good way to talk about this poem, yeah. Laura Benjamin says, these women were called candy stripers in hospitals. That's interesting. Yeah. Brenda Lee Ranta up here says, we're talking about the trays. You just return them to empty carts, and then that sort of smooths it up and clears it. That's a good suggestion. Return them to empty carts, or return the empties. Or just them. Yeah. Yeah. Return them. So there's just a lot of ways you could say that you don't have to repeat, if you repeat something, you just want it to be something important, because that'll make it stand out. First three lines this is Lisa Allison. First three lines of the second stanza could be shorter. Perhaps your face had horrific burns, no skin visible. Yeah, I agree here. This stanza does feel a little long. So maybe shorten it up. Let's see. Susan Michelle Coronel says, the title draws me in too. I think the poem can be trimmed down by removing extra words. Yeah, the clutter. Yeah, that's a good point. I'd like to know more about the speaker's conflicted feelings to create more tension in the poem. The subject is very engaging. I don't think you need the hummingbird simile. Yeah, I thought the hummingbird simile was good. In a lot of cases, I wouldn't. A hummingbird is something that comes up a lot in poems, but I think this is a place that it actually really works. Because there's so many layers to the actual metaphor. Like, she feels like a hummingbird in so many ways. Like, that could be even like a more tight poem just focusing on that one metaphor even. It's such a good one for the way, that she enters the room and darts out, and the smallness. I assume she, in the pink and white pinafore dress, being a volunteer, I assume she's really young. And so there's kind of sense of smallness within the picture that works really well for a hummingbird. And then the movement is so hummingbird-like. So it's such a great metaphor. For the actual scene. So I thought that worked really well, and maybe even make that extended more and take more advantage of that, because that's a good one. As far as the clutter goes, always removing clutter is good. Let's see. And Deidre Hines says, its honesty is what appeals. It reads as truth. Yeah, I agree. Lisa Allison says, we know the speaker is sad. We could lose saddened at the end. Yeah, that's true. We do know the speaker's sad. I think there's a way that this could be a little stronger. I would like to condense the whole thing a little bit and focus on the hummingbird a little more. That's my general advice. Over on YouTube, let's see. So, let's see. So Caitlin Buxbaum says, scary is kind of a weak adjective too. What kind of Halloween mask, zombie, movie character, wolfman? Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up. So not only can we combine this into the eyes, which I think would be a good way to make this a really strong and powerful image, but a scary Halloween mask is a really vague description of the mask itself. We could get just much more detail into what kind of mask that is, how it looks, that type of thing. So Jason Brenner says there's a lot of direct description that adds to the visuals but doesn't have much meaning behind it. Andrew Gardner says maybe cut out the Halloween mask line, just leave it swollen, distorted features. That could work too. There's sort of just a little too much description. I think that's probably the area that Jason was talking about too. Like this section here sort of slows down. It sort of gets like bogged down in its own description a little bit. And this can be half the length and get the same thing across if you tighten it up and condense it. Let's see. Okay, so I think that's about it. So these are both good poems to work on. I think both are definitely, you can feel that there's real meaning behind them, and we're always looking for meaning in poems. It's what we really want. And so, having poems that where the writer is trying to work through something and to figure out, not just having a memory, but actually trying to figure out how you felt and how things should have gone and how you feel about the fact that things didn't go the way you wanted to. That's all things that are really worth writing about in poems. So I think it works really well. Clayton Blackman here says correlation between candy striper and hummingbird could be highlighted. Yeah, that's a good idea too. So we get this very vivid, white and pink striped pinafore dress. It's a very vivid thing in the same way a hummingbird can have vivid coloring too. So that's a great way to sort of maybe pull this poem together a little bit too. So this is good content here. I'm just something to keep playing with a little bit more, I think. Let's see. Okay, so let's move on to the second poet. It's past 9:30 now. Let me just see. Is there any other comments? Let me check. I want to make sure I don't want to miss anything. Okay. Okay, so let's just move on to the next poet then. I think we covered these two poems pretty well. So the next poet is Michelle Murray, the second poet for today. And this is Waves of Life, which is interesting because we had these great waves and tiny ripples in the first poem. And here we get Waves of Life is the title. Like the waves of the ocean, sometimes you are up, reaching for the sky, white crests waving at the sunshine. Sometimes you are down, crashing, smashing, powerful water, destroying, wiping away the shore, leaving ships in its wake, broken vessels of wood, now logs, floating along like the sailors like us, just trying to find their way home, making it through another day. And sometimes all is still, not a ripple. Calm blue waters all around, peaceful serenity. So remember, when the next storm comes, when the water starts to rage, the clouds come rolling in. Swells seem so big and strong. Be patient, be brave. The waves of the ocean of life cannot shake you, cannot take you, for you know there will be peace once more. That is Waves of Life. Some advice from Michelle Murray. And I think there's something interesting here. You can see the way that poems kind of can take off. Like they can sort of feel like they're spinning their wheels for a little bit, and then you get into the rhythm of speech, and things start coming out spontaneously. And so the poem is sort of like struggling to lift off here. But then he gets to wiping away the shore. And notice how that's a very clear description of something. Like it's concrete. We get to see the waves, instead of just destroying, which is pretty vague, we get to see them actually wiping away the shore. And once we do that, it's like a light turns on for a little while, leaving the ships in its wake. We get this whole flurry of images. The lines are even longer than for most of the poem. You see how it just becomes more substantial here? And that's like the way that poems sort of spontaneously create themselves. It's like you're like booting up, and then they boot up into a poem for a little while. And so this is interesting. The wiping away, broken vessels of wood, now logs floating. We're getting great descriptions of this. The sailors like us, just trying to find their way home, make it through another day. And sometimes, but then we sort of come back to earth a little bit. So it sort of like takes off and then comes back down again really quickly. And sometimes all is still, not a ripple, calm blue waters all around, peaceful serenity. So we sort of lose that momentum that we had And I think one of the most important things to learn is to find where you get into this sort of space where you're creating things and things are substantial that are coming out, and then focusing on that and sort of focusing on keeping it in that space where poems are coming out like this. And so I don't know, that's something to focus on. Now, as far as the poem's structure goes, there's two things. So first of all, the short lines, I don't know if they're working. It is, there's a rhythm to the way that it moves. But the really short one-line lines just don't have a lot of substance. Like I already mentioned how empty destroying actually is, and powerful water. These are all really sort of empty of any kind of substance. So not only are they super short lines, but they also don't really add much to the poem, actually. Like waves of the ocean, sometimes you're up, reaching for the sky. And of course, reaching for the sky is a bit of a cliche. White crests waving at the sunshine. We also have the you here. And I always wonder who the you is. Anytime you see a you, you're sort of having this artificial distance. Because it's a way to talk about, most often in a poem, it's a way to talk about yourself without having to admit that it's yourself. And we connect more if we can know who the person is. Other times it's a direct address to people, and then we know who, and we can connect that way. But if we don't know, we're living this sort of like Schrodinger's cat thing where it's like alive and dead at the same time. It's like you and me at the same time. And there's a weakness to that, which is sort of why people deploy it, I think, because there's a sense of less danger in revealing yourself if you sort of, well, I'm not talking about myself really, so I think it works better just with the I here, and being less general like that. Reaching for the sky, white crests waving at the sunshine. Sometimes you're down, crashing, smashing, powerful water destroying. But then we get this cool run, like I said, wiping away the shores, leaving ships in its wake, broken vessels of wood, now logs floating along, the sailors like us, just trying to find their way home. So now we get the us. It went from you to us. Just trying to find their way home. Wouldn't it be our way home? Make it through another day. Sometimes all is still. And so I think one of the reasons why it sort of comes down to earth here, and stops sort of having that poetic expression that's working in this section, is because it goes back to like a pre-planned thing. I think that the poem feels to me like I thought of this metaphor, as the writer, and I wanted to compare the rough waters to the stillness. And so we sort of took off in that spontaneous, cool way that poems do, but then we wanted to get back to our original intent. And I think, you want to like run with where you're going and not try to impose yourself on the poem. It feels like there's a pre-planned message that is being imposed on the poem rather than feeling like it is coming out spontaneously. And so I think that's the issue here. So like let yourself go at this spot is my main thing I want to say about this. Still not a ripple, calm blue waters all around. I mean, there are ways you could set it up if you want to, without being so forceful about it. Like later, once we have this like floating debris and stuff, right? Like we could move like naturally from this description into calmness. Like the storm passes and then the debris is still there floating around as the water becomes calmer without like this sense of transition. And so I don't know. So that's the thing to think about. Calm blue waters all around. Then we get this like peaceful serenity, like these one-liners, which are the same as up here. They just don't add a lot. When the storm comes, when the water starts to rage, the clouds come rolling in. Swell seems so big and strong. Be patient, be brave. The waves of the ocean of life cannot shake you. So we're getting very sort of heavy-handedly imposing the idea of the poem onto the poem at this point. And it becomes sort of a moral, a moral teaching, which is maybe And maybe, as someone said, who was it here? Annie B says, this feels like a poem that has meaning for the writer. And I agree. You can feel the meaning behind it. It's sort of like, it feels like something that the writer, or the speaker anyway, the poem, is trying to tell themselves. And so maybe the key here is to be open about that. And so be sort of a self-talk, like be like a monologue, self-talking, and use instead of the you, the I. And then we can get this, like, I'm trying to remind myself this. And then I think that might feel more natural than the way that it's sort of structured out. Because it's an interesting piece, and there's a lot of, you can feel the feeling behind it. So, yeah. So that's what I kind of focus on as I revise this. Angela Gardner says, I always have a hard time with titles of my work. I try not to say the same word in the first sentence. I just wonder when it's appropriate, or is it? I noticed the poet did this. Thoughts? So the same thing we were talking about in the last poem with the trays. Anytime you repeat something, it sort of both stands out more and it doesn't have as much power. It's like this weird combination. And so, because the first time you hear something, it's novel and it sort of has more like impact behind it. But then the second time it has less impact, but then it stands out also at the same time as being something that's repeated. So it's like important, but less impactful. And so I would avoid that too. In general, I would avoid repeating. A lot of times, poets, like, they get a great last line, then they put the title up there, and it just ruins the last line because it's not surprising when you get to it anymore. And it's kind of the same thing on a smaller scale when you do that at the beginning, where it just doesn't have the strength. I mean, what you could do is make just the first line the title if you want to do that, like Waves of the Ocean, and then start here. So this is the title. And then the poem is here. Sometimes you are up, So you could do that if you want to repeat. And yeah, NEB says, I think the title of this piece gives it all away. Yeah, that's the way to think about it. And Caitlin Buxbaum says, I try not to include the title words in the poem at all most of the time. Yeah, and that's why. Let's see, over on Facebook. John Hicks says title needs to do more. So John over here on Facebook is talking about the title too. Mark Grenier said the same thing I was saying. The poems take off with erect boat lines. That might be the best focus here, although the waves waving at the sun is interesting too. Mark Grenier points out too why the all caps words, it gives them too much emphasis. Yeah, it does. All caps is something that should probably be used sparingly too. For the same kind of reasons. It just stands out in a way that doesn't really do the work you're hoping it does. So let's see. So someone said, I'm trying to find the way that the comments work. Okay, so sorry. So the comments don't nest in my view. I'm not sure if they nest for you. So I'm not sure who's referring to who. But so Dana Broadhead was saying on my thoughts as well. I was trying to find who she was talking to, and it was Mark Grenier. So having let's see. I'm not sure which comment though. But Mark also says having the line lengths mirror the movement of the waves is an interesting idea, but hard to carry out. That's interesting. I hadn't thought of it like that. But there's another thing that I can't remember the name of, but there's a certain kind of poem where just counting syllables. What is that kind called? So you'd have like one syllable line and then a 2-syllable line and a 3-syllable line, and you move the syllables that way, so the line lengths are sort of moving in a pattern, and you could do that as a wave. And there is a nice thing about the way that where the poem picks up. I was thinking of it like an airplane taking off, but you could also imagine it being like a big wave coming up, and that's an interesting thing to play with. It's tough to do, like Mark said. Let's see, but I think the poem really, it takes off and is really engaging in this section, and you want readers to be engaged, right? So focus on this writing and make that the heart of the poem. And the other things that are sort of written around it aren't as strong. Let's see. Caitlin Buckland says, I don't think it's always bad to have that last line be the title, but good to know when submitting poems to Rattle. So the last line, I think it works as a title if it's like changing something. If the title, if there's a way that the title is setting up an expectation, and then you're playing off that expectation by having it, and so it doesn't mean the same thing that you thought it was going to mean. Like there's a way that it can work in certain poems, but it's just a lot of times what happens is poets, like the way that it ended, and then they just make that the title, and that takes away the power of the ending usually. Let's see. Okay, let's try the other poem. And the other is Just a Girl. Again, this is Michelle Murray, Just a Girl. As I walk outside under the big blue sky, watching the clouds roll by, the sun on my face, its rays beaming down on me, I realize I'm just a girl in this big world, a small figure walking along a speck of dust in this galaxy, or wide galaxy of space, this road I'm on, just a small part of the vast universe filled with gases, planets, and such. And here I am, walking, wondering what my place is, where I fit in, just a girl strolling along. So a pretty simple poem here, Just a Girl, and it comes that sort of that pale blue dot type photo, that sort of your smallness in the universe. Is the concept here, and that is a feeling that I don't know, it's like the sublime or something. How big the bigness of the universe and the smallness of you, which is definitely interesting. Like we were talking about the first two poems that have are worthy things to write about. This is a worthy thing to write about too, as is the other one. So all four poems I think are worth being poems. Here we get a lot of sort of really simple, meaning type cliche language. So the big blue sky. The rays beaming down, this big world. So they're all, cliche type things. And the problem with cliches is that they just don't have the emotional power because we've heard them so much that they sort of register already as this constellation of thought. And so when that constellation fires again, it doesn't provide a whole lot of meaning for us. It doesn't engage on the level of emotion, and that's really the problem with cliches. So we get this, this big world, the rays beaming. So you got to find new ways, like make it new. Was I think Pound said make it new, and that's why you have to make it new because you're trying to like force a reaction, like force an emotional reaction in the reader is what a poet's trying to do, and it's really hard to do that with language you've already heard. And so finding new ways to say things is a key part of writing a poem. As I walk outside under the big blue sky, watching the clouds roll by, there's something about the rhyme that's sort of too close. It early in the poem, it sort of sets up an expectation that there's going to be more rhyme, which is unfulfilled. And so I would sort of avoid a rhyme there unless you're going to rhyme more in the poem. Because again, like we were talking about with the repetition of trays, a rhyme makes things stand out too, just psychologically. And so the rhyme really stands out to our ear. And then when it stands out, it makes this feel really important. And then we don't get that ever again. And so there's sort of this, I don't know, like a letdown almost. Even if you don't like, I'm trying to find a way to say it besides letdown, because some people don't like rhyming poetry, but it's an expectation that doesn't go anywhere. The sun on my face, its rays beaming down on me. So for watching the clouds roll by, find a way to say that differently too, that's more interesting and new, and also without the rhyme. But if you're going to change big blue sky, then the rhyme would be gone anyway. Its rays beaming down on me. I realize I'm just a girl in this big world, a small figure walking along a speck of dust in this wide galaxy of space. So here we start to get that, the takeoff a little bit, like we got in the last poem too. And notice how, again, it's when we get specific with the detail. A small, when you imagine a small figure walking along a speck of dust in this wide galaxy of space, it's a very, it becomes a visually interesting image. And then the poem sort of there's sort of a pull to the language at that point, if you can feel it, in this wide galaxy of space, this road I'm on, just a small part of the vast universe. Again, vast universe is a bit of a cliche, filled with gases, planets, and such. The "and such" is really interesting, because this is a shift in register too. But I kind of like the use of that. Like, it's a very casual way to say. It's a casual thing. Like, we're just sort of chatting all of a sudden. And I kind of like the just chatting tone, even though it doesn't really work here because it's only in this one spot. But maybe that could work throughout the whole poem in a way that would be interesting. Let's see. NAB says, I like the contrasting ideas of simplicity and the unknowable. There's a sunny, carefree element which feels very natural. Yeah, this poem feels very honest to me and very natural. Like, it's something that I can definitely imagine thinking about because, everybody has this kind of thought looking up, especially, the stars at night or the sun in the day and thinking about, like, what's hidden behind the blue sky. And something that's definitely very relatable. And there is a free, just a girl strolling along. The "and such" kind of fits with the just a girl strolling along. There's sort of casualness, which comes up briefly, but I think maybe that could be more of a focus of the poem in the way that it's told. Let's see. Mark Finnish says the poem gets better with a "here I am" line and could be started there. Shorter in this case might be better. Where's the "here I am"? Oh, and "here I am." Yeah. I mean, this is a kind of poem that could be very, very short, even shorter than this. It could be half the length for what's being told. And condensing is always good because more dense is more powerful. Nalaima Karkanis says, I like the last line, just a girl strolling along. I do too. It has to do a lot with this "and such." Like, there's a casualness to this, and there's a casualness to the strolling along that I really like. And I feel like that's the heart of the poem here. That, like, there's this big profoundness out there, but I'm just living my life, like, just strolling along. And there's something, I don't know, there's an interesting feeling to that, which I like. It is interesting enough to be part of a poem. Peter O'Donohue says the poem strolls along too. It needs a trip, and that's a good. I mean, that's there is though some tension and drama because it's the contrast between the vastness of the universe and the smallness of me. That does work as sort of a tension, as a problem that moves the poem forward too. So I think that is a trip, actually. John Hicks says, don't need vast universe to so closely follow wide galaxy. And yeah, I'd agree with that too. I had this exact thought. So Kimberly McNeil says, I want to convert it to a haiku. And that's what I was thinking too, actually. I didn't want to force haiku on anybody, but I think this poem could be that condensed. And so, because it really is, there's a juxtaposition. I mean, it's sort of like you can see the way haiku works in this poem, even though it's much longer. Because a haiku is really about that juxtaposition, about that cut, that kirigi, or kiru, whatever they call it. And that juxtaposition between sort of two like separate universes. And that's really what's going on in this poem. There's the huge vastness of the universe, so massive that I can't even wrap my head around it. And then there's the smallness of me sitting here on this speck of dust of the earth. And those two things contrast each other. And having like that one universe next to the other universe is what a haiku does. And that's what this poem is really doing. So it sort of naturally sets itself up as a haiku. It's sort of an expanded haiku right now. And it'd be much more powerful if you could find a way to make it that condensed, like a little tiny nugget of energy, like E equals MC squared, So Peter O'Donoghue says, this is his haiku using this. I'm walking along, thinking about the world, wondering why I, ? That is his haiku. And yet you could do something like that. I think that would work. Let's see. Look at some other comments here. Andrew Gartner says, are there too many one-word lines? Yeah, I think that's just a propensity that the poet has. That, I mean, sometimes it can work, but I don't know. It feels, when you use one-word lines, it feels like it doesn't have a lot of content, and I think that's kind of the problem here. Here I am walking, wondering. Like, those aren't just like if you think of a line as like a unit of meaning or something. There's not a whole lot to that unit right there. There's not a whole lot going on if you're just wondering. So I don't know, I'm not a fan of the one-word lines. Occasionally it works. Let's see. Jason Brenner says, I envision this poem being sung by a country singer in the 90s for some reason. That's an interesting comment. Okay. So I think, I got to get going. It's almost 10 o'clock, but I think that's a good amount of discussion for these two poems. So once again, we had Just a Girl by Michelle Murray. Then we also had Waves of Life. So those are the two poems by Michelle Murray. Then we had Confluence of Great Waves and Tiny Ripples. And we had My Apology to the Patient I Walked Out on in 1965. All poems that have some substance, so I like seeing that. So thanks for sharing those poems, Lois, Villemaire, and Michelle Murray. And I'm going to... Yeah, so Caitlin Buxton says, the kuriji is the Japanese term for the cutting word. Yeah, so what is the word for the cut? Is it kiru? Kiru? Is that the word I'm thinking of? Or is it kiri? Kuri? I'm not sure. The kuriji is like the punctuation that serves as the cut. Like in English, a lot of times it's a dash. In Japanese, there's a few different actual words that are used as punctuation. And that's the kuriji. But anyway. But yeah, that's it for today. Thanks so much for joining me as always. And like I mentioned at the very beginning of the show, the guest on the Rattlecast this week is going to be Marissa Davis, not at the late time, at the early time. So it's going to be Sunday at noon Eastern time to make sure we catch her in France so she doesn't have to stay up until 3 a.m. And Marissa Davis was in the Appalachian Poets issue. It's a wonderful poet. Her chapbook just out is My Name in Other Languages. I'm Learning How to Speak, selected by Denez Smith. Excellent chapbook, and she's got new poems too she's going to be sharing. That is this Sunday's Rattlecast, and the prompt for this week, which I haven't written a poem, so I should probably check it out myself. The prompt for this week is To Autumn by John Keats. It's one of the most highly regarded poems in the English language. It's richly imagistic and descriptive. Write your own ode to autumn. So that's the prompt for this week. Write an ode to autumn. That's your challenge for the next 2 days if you haven't done it yet. And then we'll talk to Marissa Davis. We'll have Poets Respond Live. We'll have open lines for anything you want to share. And that is the early time, Sunday, October 3rd, noon Eastern time, 9 a.m. Pacific. See you then. Have a great weekend in the meantime. Bye.